I woke up at 3 in the morning to complete silence, which in itself was the loudest alarm I could have possibly heard. My house in Scottsdale, Arizona had never been this quiet. The constant hum of my security system, the soft whir of my refrigerators, the gentle buzz of electronics throughout my home office, all gone. I sat up in bed, my heart racing as I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. The screen lit up showing a notification from my security company. System offline power loss detected. My name is Lucas Kendrick, and I had invested over $40,000 in a state-of-the-art home security system after a string of break-ins hit our gated community, Desert Vista Estates, last year. The system ran on a dedicated circuit connected to my backup generator, a commercial-grade Generac unit that could power my entire house for weeks if needed. I had specifically designed it that way because I worked from home as a cybersecurity consultant for Fortune 500 companies, and I couldn't afford to lose power to my servers or security system. I threw on a pair of jeans and a shirt, rushed downstairs, and headed straight for my backyard. The motion sensor lights didn't activate because, of course, they had no power. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate to the side yard where my generator sat in its weatherproof enclosure. The enclosure door was wide open, hanging on one hinge. The generator was gone. My first thought was theft, but as I looked closer, I could see tire tracks in the grass leading from my yard to the side gate, which had been left open. These weren't subtle tracks. Whoever took my generator had used a vehicle, probably a truck or trailer, and they hadn't bothered to cover their tracks. I followed the path with my phone light until I reached the street, where the tracks turned left, heading toward the community clubhouse. That's when I noticed something else. Down the street, about 3 blocks away near the clubhouse, I could see lights. Bright lights. The kind of bright lights that come from an event being powered by, say, a commercial-grade generator. I walked back inside and immediately called the police. The non-emergency line connected me to a dispatcher who sounded half asleep. "Scottsdale Police, what's your emergency?" "Someone stole my backup generator from my property. It's worth about $8,000 and I have security footage." I paused, realizing the irony. Well, I would have security footage if my security system hadn't gone offline when they took the generator that powers it. The dispatcher took down my information and address. "An officer will be out within the hour to take a report. Can you describe the generator?" I gave her all the details, including the serial number I had memorized for insurance purposes. Then I mentioned what I had seen. "I think I know where it might be. There are lights on at our community clubhouse, and I saw tire tracks leading in that direction." "Sir, please don't investigate on your own. Wait for the officer." I agreed, hung up, and immediately grabbed my keys. I wasn't about to wait an hour while whoever took my generator potentially damaged it or moved it somewhere else. I drove the 3 blocks to the clubhouse, even though I could have walked. The tire tracks were clearly visible in the street lights, and they led straight to the clubhouse parking lot. As I pulled in, I couldn't believe what I saw. My Generac generator, distinctive with the custom blue paint job I had applied, and my initials LK stenciled on the side, was sitting on a flatbed trailer next to the clubhouse. Extension cords ran from it through an open window into the building. Inside, I could see lights blazing and I could hear music playing. I parked and walked up to the clubhouse entrance. The front doors were unlocked, so I walked in. The main hall was decorated with balloons and streamers. Tables were set up with what looked like breakfast preparations for some kind of early morning event. In the kitchen area, I could see someone moving around. "Hello," I called out. A woman emerged from the kitchen, wearing a pink tracksuit and carrying a clipboard. I recognized her immediately. Patricia Williamson, the president of our HOA board. She was in her mid-50s, had blonde hair cut in that specific suburban mom style that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." And she had a permanent expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. "Lucas, what are you doing here at this hour?" she asked, looking annoyed at my presence. "That's my generator outside, Patricia, the one you apparently stole from my property." Her face didn't show even a flicker of guilt or surprise. "We didn't steal anything. We requisitioned community resources for a community event." "You requisitioned? You broke into my yard and took my personal property without permission. That's called theft." She waved her hand dismissively. According to HOA bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph 12, the board has the right to utilize community resources in emergency situations. The Clubhouse generator failed yesterday, and we have the annual Desert Vista Charity Breakfast scheduled for 6 this morning. We have over 200 people coming, including donors who contribute to our community improvements. That bylaw refers to community resources, not personal property. My generator is on my property, purchased with my money, and it powers my entire security system. "You've left my house completely unprotected." Patricia made a note on her clipboard. "I'll make sure you're compensated for fuel usage. We'll have it back to you by noon." "Compensated for fuel? You've disabled my $40,000 security system. You've breached my property." "I've already called the police." Her expression hardened. "The police? Really, Lucas? Over helping your community? This is exactly the kind of selfish attitude that makes living in an HOA difficult for everyone. We're trying to raise money for charity, and you're worried about your excessive security system." "Excessive? We had 12 break-ins in this community last year. I secured my home and you just disabled all of it, and you did it by committing a crime." "I did nothing of the sort. I made an executive decision as HOA president. If you have a problem with it, you can bring it up at the next board meeting. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a charity breakfast to prepare for." She turned and walked back toward the kitchen. I stood there, momentarily stunned by her complete lack of understanding of what she had done. I pulled out my phone and took several photos of my generator connected to the clubhouse, the extension cords, the trailer it was sitting on, and the tire tracks that led from the clubhouse back toward my house. I was about to leave when another person walked in through the front door. It was my neighbor, Margaret Chen, who lived 2 houses down from me. She was carrying several boxes of pastries. "Lucas, what are you doing here?" she asked, looking surprised. "Margaret, did you know they stole my generator?" She set the boxes down on a nearby table. "What?" "No. Patricia just called me yesterday evening and said the clubhouse generator was broken and asked if I could come early to help set up. She said she had arranged for a backup generator. She arranged for it by taking mine from my property without permission." Margaret's eyes widened. "She took it from your yard. Without asking. Broke my gate, drove onto my property and took it. Left my whole security system offline." Margaret had always been reasonable, one of the few people on the HOA board who actually listened to residents. She served as the treasurer and had voted against several of Patricia's more extreme proposals over the past year. "Lucas, I had no idea. That's completely inappropriate." Patricia told us in the emergency board meeting yesterday that she had secured a rental generator. She never mentioned taking anyone's personal property. There was an emergency board meeting yesterday afternoon. Patricia called it when the maintenance crew said the clubhouse generator was beyond repair. She said she had found a solution and that we needed to approve emergency funds for a rental. We approved $2,000. I had no idea this is what she meant. The sound of a car pulling up outside interrupted our conversation. Through the window, I could see a Scottsdale police cruiser parking next to my truck. An officer got out and looked around, spotting my generator immediately. I walked outside to meet him. "Are you Lucas Kendrick?" the officer asked. He was in his early 30s, tall, with a nameplate that read Officer Morrison. "Yes, sir. That's my generator," I said, pointing to the Generac on the trailer. "I called about the theft." Officer Morrison walked over to examine the generator. "Those your initials on the side?" "Yes, LK." "Lucas Kendrick. I can provide the receipt, serial number, everything. I bought it from Home Depot 18 months ago and had it professionally installed." He took photos with his phone and made notes. "Tell me what happened." I explained everything, from waking up to find my security system offline to following the tire tracks to the clubhouse. As I was talking, Patricia came storming out of the building. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding. I'm Patricia Williamson, president of the Desert Vista Estates HOA. We borrowed this generator for a community charity event. This gentleman is blowing things out of proportion." Officer Morrison looked at her. "Madam, did you have permission to take this generator from Mr. Kendrick's property?" "I don't need permission. As HOA president, I have the authority to utilize community resources." "This isn't a community resource, madam. It's private property registered to Mr. Kendrick. The HOA bylaws clearly state, madam, HOA bylaws don't supersede Arizona state law. If you took someone's property without permission, that's theft, regardless of your position in the HOA." Patricia's face turned red. "This is ridiculous. We're trying to host a charity event. We have donors coming in less than 3 hours. That doesn't give you the right to take someone's property," Officer Morrison said. He turned to me. "Mr. Kendrick, do you want to press charges?" I looked at Patricia, who was glaring at me with such intensity I thought she might spontaneously combust. Part of me wanted to just take my generator back and leave, but another part of me, the part that was tired of HOA overreach and abuse of power, wanted to make a point. "Yes," I said. "I want to press charges." Patricia gasped. "You can't be serious." "You broke into my property, Patricia. You disabled my security system. You put my home at risk. And you did it all without even asking, because you thought your position gave you the right to do whatever you want." Officer Morrison nodded. "Madam, I'm going to need to see some identification." As Patricia fumbled for her wallet, Margaret came outside. "Officer, I'm on the HOA board. I want to state for the record that I had no knowledge of this. Mrs. Williamson told us she had secured a rental generator. She never mentioned taking anyone's personal property." Officer Morrison made note of this. "What's your name, madam?" "Margaret Chen. I live at 4523 Desert Vista Drive." By this point, more people were arriving for the breakfast setup. Several of them stopped to watch the scene unfolding in the parking lot. Patricia was trying to maintain her composure, but I could see her hands shaking as she handed over her driver's license. "Mrs. Williamson, I'm issuing you a citation for theft. Mr. Kendrick will need to file a formal report at the station. You'll receive a court date in the mail." "This is absurd. I'm trying to help the community." "You're welcome to explain that to the judge," Officer Morrison said calmly. He handed the citation to Patricia, who snatched it from his hand. "Mr. Kendrick, do you need assistance getting your generator back to your property?" The officer asked. "I have my truck. I can handle it, but I'll need help loading it." Officer Morrison called for another unit to assist. While we waited, more residents arrived for the breakfast. Several of them approached Patricia, asking what was happening. She gave them a version of events that painted me as a selfish troublemaker who was sabotaging a charity event. One of the arrivals, A man named Steve, who lived across the street from me, came over to where I was standing. "Lucas, what's going on?" I explained the situation. Steve's expression went from confused to angry. "She took your generator from your property, broke the gate, drove right in and took it. And she's acting like she did nothing wrong. According to her, HOA bylaws give her the right to take whatever she wants for community use." Steve shook his head. "That's not how any of this works. I used to be on an HOA board in Colorado before I moved here. Board members don't have the authority to seize private property. That's insane." Another officer arrived, and together they helped me disconnect my generator from the clubhouse power and load it onto my truck. It took about 20 minutes. By the time we finished, the sun was starting to come up, and there were about 30 people gathered around the clubhouse, all asking what was happening and why the lights were going out. Patricia was in full meltdown mode, shouting about how I was ruining the charity breakfast and that the HOA would be taking action against me for failing to support community events. Margaret was trying to calm her down while simultaneously explaining to confused residents that Patricia had taken my property without permission. As I secured the generator in my truck bed, Officer Morrison handed me a card. "Stop by the station today and file a full report. Include any photos or documentation you have. If you have security footage of the theft, bring that too. My security system was offline when they took it. That's the whole problem. Do you have any cameras that don't run on your main system?" I thought about it. "Actually, yes. I have a trail camera on a tree in my front yard. Battery powered. I set it up to watch for coyotes, but it should have caught anyone coming onto the property." "Perfect. Bring that footage when you file the report." I thanked him and drove home, my generator rattling in the truck bed. When I pulled into my driveway, I could see the damage more clearly in the morning light. They had broken the lock on my side gate and driven tire tracks through my grass and garden. Several plants were crushed, and there were deep ruts where they had maneuvered the trailer. I spent the next 2 hours getting my generator reinstalled and my security system back online. My security company called while I was working to check on the extended outage. I explained what had happened, and the representative said they would make a note in my file and that I should document everything for potential legal action. Once the system was back up, I checked the footage from my trail camera. Sure enough, it had captured everything. At 1:47 a.m., a pickup truck with an attached trailer had pulled into my driveway. 2 men got out, and about 10 minutes later, Patricia's BMW pulled up. The camera clearly showed Patricia directing the men, pointing toward my side yard and then waiting while they worked. The footage showed them using bolt cutters on my gate lock, driving the truck through my yard, loading my generator onto the trailer, and leaving. Patricia followed them in her BMW, and the timestamp showed they headed toward the clubhouse. I downloaded all the footage to a USB drive. Then I took photos of all the damage to my property, including the broken gate, the tire tracks, and the crushed plants. I made a list of everything that would need to be repaired or replaced. By 9 in the morning, I was at the Scottsdale Police Department filing a formal report. The detective who handled my case, Detective Sarah Rodriguez, reviewed all my evidence carefully. "This is pretty clear-cut," she said. "You have video evidence of the theft, you have the property damage, and you have her citation from this morning. Mrs. Williamson is looking at theft charges, property damage, and possibly trespassing." "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll forward this to the prosecutor's office. Given the value of the property and the evidence, they'll likely file formal charges. You'll also want to file an insurance claim for the property damage, and you should consider getting a restraining order if you think there might be retaliation. Through the HOA. HOA board members don't have immunity from the law. If she's harassing you or damaging your property, you have the same recourse as you would against anyone else. I thanked Detective Rodriguez and left the station. I had planned to go home and get some work done, but my phone started buzzing with notifications. I had been added to a community email chain titled Emergency HOA Meeting Regarding Lucas Kendrick. The email, sent by Patricia, outlined how I had sabotaged the charity breakfast by refusing to help the community in its time of need, and weaponizing the police against volunteer board members who were simply trying to do good for others. It went on to say that an emergency HOA meeting would be held that evening to discuss appropriate actions against me for conduct detrimental to the community. I forwarded the email to Detective Rodriguez with a note asking if this constituted harassment or retaliation. She responded within an hour saying that while the email itself wasn't illegal, any actions taken against me by the HOA in retaliation for pressing charges could be considered witness intimidation, and I should document everything. The emergency meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the Clubhouse. I had no intention of missing it. I spent the afternoon preparing. I printed out copies of the trail camera footage screenshots, the police report, photos of the damage to my property, and a copy of the actual HOA bylaws that Patricia kept claiming gave her authority to seize private property. Spoiler alert, they didn't. I also did some research on Patricia Williamson herself. It turned out this wasn't her first controversy as HOA president. Over the past 2 years, there had been multiple complaints filed against her with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOA disputes in the state. She had issued over 40 violations to residents for minor infractions, like having the wrong shade of beige paint or leaving trash cans visible for 30 minutes too long. 3 homeowners had sued the HOA during her tenure. 2 of those suits had been settled, and 1 was still pending. At 6:45 p.m., I drove to the Clubhouse. The parking lot was packed. Apparently, word had spread about the drama, and people wanted to see what would happen. I recognized most of the cars as belonging to residents I had seen around the community over the past 3 years I had lived here. Inside, the main hall was set up with rows of chairs facing a long table where the board members would sit. I took a seat in the back row, my folder of documentation on my lap. People were talking in small groups, and I could hear my name mentioned several times. The tone seemed split. Some people were defending Patricia's actions as necessary for the community. Others were questioning whether taking someone's property without permission was ever acceptable. At exactly 7 p.m., the board members filed in and took their seats at the front table. Patricia sat in the center, flanked by Margaret on her right and 3 other board members I recognized. Daniel Foster, the vice president, Rachel Morrison, the secretary, and James Kim, a member at large. Patricia banged a gavel on the table. This emergency meeting of the Desert Vista Estates, HOA, is now called to order. We're here to discuss the conduct of Lucas Kendrick, who last night refused to allow the HOA to use community resources for a charitable event and subsequently involved law enforcement, resulting in criminal charges against me personally. Margaret immediately raised her hand. Point of order. That's not an accurate representation of what happened. Patricia glared at her. I'm the president of this board. I'll determine what's accurate. You took his personal property without permission, Margaret said, her voice firm. That's theft, Patricia. It doesn't matter what your intentions were. Several people in the audience murmured in agreement. Patricia's face was turning red again. The bylaws clearly state that the board has authority over community resources, Patricia insisted. His generator isn't a community resource, Margaret countered. It's private property on private property. You broke into his yard and took it. I raised my hand. Patricia saw me but deliberately looked away. We're not taking questions from residents at this time. Actually, Daniel Foster spoke up. If this meeting is about Mr. Kendrick, he has the right to address the board. That's in our bylaws too, Patricia. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but several people in the audience were now voicing their agreement that I should be allowed to speak. She finally, reluctantly, nodded in my direction. I stood up and walked to the front of the room carrying my folder. Thank you. I'd like to start by correcting several misrepresentations made by Mrs. Williamson. First, I did not refuse to help with the charity breakfast. I was never asked. Mrs. Williamson broke into my property at nearly 2 in the morning and stole my generator without my knowledge or consent. I opened my folder and held up screenshots from the trail camera. I have video evidence of Mrs. Williamson and 2 unidentified men breaking the lock on my gate, entering my property, and removing my generator. This footage has been provided to the Scottsdale Police Department. The room erupted in conversation. Patricia was banging her gavel, but people were talking over her. Second, I continued, Mrs. Williamson claims the HOA bylaws give her authority to take private property. They don't. I have the bylaws here. I held up the printed document. Section 4, paragraph 12, which Mrs. Williamson referenced, specifically refers to common area resources and shared community equipment. My generator is neither. It's private property, purchased with my personal funds, installed on my private property, and it powers my home security system. The security system that Mrs. Williamson disabled when she stole my generator. My home was left completely unprotected for over 4 hours. Given that we had 12 break-ins in this community last year, I consider this a serious safety issue. Margaret was nodding vigorously. Several other residents were looking at Patricia with expressions ranging from disappointment to anger. Furthermore, I said, the theft caused significant damage to my property. My gate lock was destroyed. My landscaping was damaged. My garden was driven through. I estimate repairs will cost at least $2,000. Patricia finally managed to restore order by banging her gavel repeatedly. That's enough. You're making this sound like some kind of criminal enterprise. I was trying to help the community. By committing a crime, I said flatly. I did what needed to be done for a charity event. You had $2,000 in emergency funds approved by the board to rent a generator. Why didn't you do that? The room went silent. Even Patricia seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Margaret looked at her with surprise. You said you had secured a rental, Margaret said slowly. I found a better solution, Patricia said defensively. You mean a free solution, I said. You didn't want to spend the HOA's money, so you decided to just take my property instead. The room erupted again. This time, the conversation was decidedly against Patricia. People were standing up, pointing, voices raised. Rachel Morrison, the secretary, was frantically typing notes on her laptop. Daniel Foster was shaking his head. James Kim looked deeply uncomfortable. Margaret stood up. I move that we table this discussion of Mr. Kendrick's conduct, as there's clearly nothing to discuss. He was the victim of theft, not the perpetrator of any wrongdoing. Instead, I move that we discuss whether Mrs. Williamson should remain as president of this board given her actions. You can't make that motion, Patricia shouted. I just did, Margaret said. Do I have a second? Seconded, Daniel Foster said immediately. Patricia looked panicked. This is out of order. You can't just remove me. Actually, we can, Margaret said. She had her own copy of the bylaws open on her phone. Section 7, Paragraph 3. Board members can be removed by a majority vote of the remaining board members if they engage in conduct detrimental to the community or if they violate their fiduciary duties. I have not violated anything. You committed theft using your position as HOA president, Margaret said. You damaged a homeowner's property. You disabled his security system. You used HOA authority to justify criminal actions, and you did it all without consulting the rest of the board. If that's not a violation of your fiduciary duties, I don't know what is. The room applauded. Patricia looked around wildly, as if hoping someone would come to her defense. No one did. I vote to remove Patricia Williamson as HOA president and as a member of the board, Margaret said. Second, said Daniel. All in favor? Margaret asked. 4 hands went up. Margaret, Daniel, Rachel, and James. Patricia sat alone, her face pale. Motion carries, Margaret said. Patricia, you're removed from the board effective immediately. Please surrender any HOA property in your possession, including keys to the clubhouse and files. Patricia stood up, her hands shaking. You'll regret this, all of you. I'll sue. I'll sue the HOA. I'll sue each of you personally. You're welcome to try, Margaret said calmly. But given that you're facing criminal charges for theft, I'd suggest you focus on that. Patricia grabbed her bag and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The clubhouse erupted in applause and conversation. Margaret waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. As the longest-serving remaining board member, I'm temporarily assuming the role of acting president until we can hold proper elections. First order of business. Mr. Kendrick, on behalf of the HOA, I apologize for what happened to you. The board will cover all repair costs to your property and will ensure this never happens again. More applause. I nodded my thanks. Second order of business. We need to discuss getting our own backup generator properly installed at the clubhouse so we're not dependent on anyone else's equipment. The meeting continued for another hour, covering various community issues. Several people came up to me afterward to apologize and to express their shock at what Patricia had done. Steve, my neighbor, shook my hand. I'm glad you pressed charges, he said. People like that need to learn that being on an HOA board doesn't make them above the law. I drove home that night feeling vindicated but also somewhat sad. I had never wanted any of this drama. I had just wanted to live quietly in my home with adequate security. But Patricia's actions had forced me to take a stand. Over the next few weeks, things developed quickly on multiple fronts. The prosecutor's office formally charged Patricia Williamson with theft, criminal trespassing, and criminal damage to property. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been acting in her capacity as HOA president, and therefore shouldn't be held personally responsible, but the judge wasn't buying it. The fact that she had used HOA emergency funds approval as a cover story while actually stealing private property worked against her. The HOA's insurance company investigated the incident and determined that Patricia had acted outside the scope of her authority, which meant the HOA wouldn't be liable for her actions. However, Margaret made good on her promise, and the board voted to use HOA funds to repair the damage to my property anyway. They hired a contractor who fixed my gate, replaced my lock, repaired my landscaping, and even added some additional plants as a goodwill gesture. I also received several apology letters from board members and residents who had initially supported Patricia at the emergency meeting before they learned all the facts. One letter particularly stood out. It was from a woman named Gloria Gardner who lived at the other end of the community. She wrote that she had received 17 violations from Patricia over the past year for minor issues, and had felt bullied and harassed. She thanked me for standing up to Patricia and said she felt like she could finally enjoy her home again. The preliminary hearing for Patricia's case was scheduled for mid-March. I received a subpoena to testify, along with Margaret and the two men who had helped Patricia steal my generator. It turned out those men were freelance handymen Patricia had hired through a local service, and she had told them the generator belonged to the HOA and needed to be moved for repairs. When the police contacted them, they were shocked to learn they had participated in a theft. On March 18th, I showed up at the Maricopa County Superior Court for the hearing. Detective Rodriguez was there, along with the prosecutor, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s named Amanda Torres. Patricia arrived with her lawyer, a man who kept checking his watch as if he had somewhere better to be. The hearing was relatively straightforward. The prosecutor presented the evidence: my trail camera footage, the police report, photos of the damage, and testimony from Officer Morrison about responding to the scene. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that this was a civil matter that should be handled between me and the HOA, not a criminal case. Judge Martin Henderson, a stern man in his 60s, disagreed. "Counsel, your client broke into Mr. Kendrick's property, destroyed his gate lock, and removed equipment worth approximately $8,000. The fact that she held a position on an HOA board doesn't give her the right to commit theft. This is absolutely a criminal matter." Patricia took the stand in her own defense, which her lawyer seemed reluctant about. She stuck to her story that she had been acting for the good of the community and that she had intended to return the generator. "Mrs. Williamson," Prosecutor Torres said during cross-examination, "if you intended to return the generator, why didn't you leave a note? Why didn't you call Mr. Kendrick? Why did you break his gate lock instead of knocking on his door? It was the middle of the night. I didn't want to wake him. But you had no problem breaking into his property and taking his equipment. I borrowed it, without permission." "That's theft, Mrs. Williamson." The hearing lasted about 3 hours. At the end, Judge Henderson ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. He set a trial date for June 3rd and released Patricia on her own recognizance, with the condition that she have no contact with me or my property. Between the hearing and the trial, life in Desert Vista Estates slowly returned to normal. Margaret proved to be an excellent HOA president. She held regular meetings, actually listened to residents' concerns, and made decisions based on community consensus rather than personal preference. The board hired a company to install a proper backup generator at the clubhouse, which cost about $12,000 but was worth it for the peace of mind. I focused on my work and tried to put the drama behind me. My security system ran perfectly, and I even upgraded a few components with some of the money I had saved for other projects. My insurance company reimbursed me for the deductible on my property damage claim, and the HOA's payment covered everything else. In late May, about a week before the trial, Patricia's lawyer contacted Prosecutor Torres with a plea deal offer. Patricia would plead guilty to 1 count of theft and 1 count of criminal damage, pay restitution for all damages, and accept probation. In exchange, the trespassing charge would be dropped, and she would avoid jail time. The prosecutor called me to discuss it. "What do you think, Mr. Kendrick? We can definitely win at trial, but this gets you full restitution and closes the case quickly. Will she have a criminal record?" I asked. "Yes, a misdemeanor conviction for theft. It'll show up on background checks, and the restitution covers everything. My gate, my landscaping, the security system downtime, everything. Everything." Plus, her lawyer mentioned she's willing to pay an additional $2,000 for your time and trouble, though that's not part of the formal plea. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see her face the full consequences at trial, but another part of me just wanted this to be over. If she pays full restitution plus the additional amount, and she pleads guilty so there's no question about what she did, I'll agree to it. The plea deal was accepted. On June 3rd, instead of a trial, I attended a plea hearing where Patricia Williamson stood before Judge Henderson and admitted to theft and criminal damage. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordered to pay $8,450 in restitution, plus $2,000 in additional compensation to me. The judge also ordered her to complete an anger management course and banned her from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 5 years. Patricia's statement to the court was brief and clearly coached by her lawyer. I made a serious error in judgment. I let my desire to help the community cloud my judgment about proper procedures and respect for private property. I apologized to Mr. Kendrick and to the Desert Vista Estates community. It wasn't the most heartfelt apology I had ever heard, but at least she admitted what she had done. After the hearing, Prosecutor Torres told me that I should receive the restitution payments within 30 days. The money arrived exactly 28 days later. A cashier's check for $10,450, along with a one-sentence note from Patricia's lawyer. Payment in full as ordered by the court. I deposited the check and used part of the money to upgrade my security system even further. I added additional cameras, improved the backup power system, and installed a secondary trail camera on the other side of my property. I wasn't taking any chances. Life in Desert Vista Estates settled into a peaceful routine. Margaret was re-elected as HOA president in the regular August elections by a landslide. She implemented new policies requiring board approval for any actions involving individual homeowners' property, and created a system for transparent communication about HOA decisions. Several people who had been afraid to speak up during Patricia's reign came forward with suggestions and ideas that actually improved the community. The charity breakfast that had been disrupted by Patricia's theft was rescheduled for September and went off without a hitch, powered by the new Clubhouse generator. I even volunteered to help set up, which earned me some good-natured ribbing from other residents about making sure my equipment stayed secure. In October, I received a letter from the Arizona Department of Real Estate. It turned out that, after Patricia's conviction, several other residents had filed formal complaints about her conduct as HOA president, including allegations of harassment, selective enforcement of rules, and abuse of power. The department investigated and found multiple violations of HOA regulations. They issued a formal censure and permanent ban on Patricia serving in any HOA leadership position in the state. The letter thanked me for my cooperation with their investigation. I also learned, through the community gossip network, that Patricia and her husband had put their house up for sale and were moving to Nevada. I felt a mix of relief and something almost like pity. She had destroyed her own reputation and legal standing because she couldn't admit that maybe, just maybe, stealing someone's generator wasn't the right solution to her problem. One evening in November, about 9 months after the generator theft, I was sitting on my back patio enjoying the cooler Arizona weather when my doorbell rang. I checked my security camera feed on my phone and saw Margaret standing at my front door, holding a small package. I opened the door. "Hey Margaret, what's up?" "Hi Lucas, I just wanted to drop this off." She handed me the package. "It's from the board, a little thank you." I opened it. Inside was a custom-made plaque that read, "Presented to Lucas Kendrick, for standing up for what's right and helping make Desert Vista Estates a better community. With gratitude, the HOA board. You didn't have to do this, I said, genuinely touched. We wanted to. What Patricia did was wrong and you had every right to be angry. But you handled it through proper channels. You didn't lash out or try to get revenge. You just stood your ground and let the system work. That takes character and we appreciate it. I just didn't want to be pushed around in my own home. And that's exactly the right attitude. An HOA should serve the community, not rule over it. Patricia forgot that. We won't. After Margaret left, I mounted the plaque in my home office, right next to my security system control panel. It served as a good reminder that sometimes standing up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable or controversial, is the right thing to do. The following months passed quietly. Patricia's house sold in January to a young couple with 2 kids who seemed nice and normal. They introduced themselves to the neighbors, followed the HOA rules without complaint, and generally fit right into the community. It was like the whole Patricia era had been a bad dream that we all collectively moved past. My work continued to go well. The security system never went offline again except for scheduled maintenance. I even wrote a blog post about the experience, changing names and some details, titled, "Why Your HOA Doesn't Own Your Stuff." It went moderately viral in HOA horror story circles and homeowner advocacy groups. In March, exactly 1 year after the preliminary hearing, I received a final notification from the court system. Patricia Williamson had completed her community service hours and was proceeding through probation without any violations. The case was officially closed from the criminal side. I also got a call from a local news reporter who had somehow heard about the story and wanted to do a piece on HOA overreach. I politely declined. I had gotten my justice, my property had been repaired, and my community had better leadership. I didn't need or want any more attention. On a warm evening in late April, the HOA held its annual spring barbecue at the Clubhouse. It was a well-attended event, with families, retirees, and everyone in between enjoying food, games, and conversation. The new generator hummed quietly in its enclosure, properly installed and maintained, providing power for the sound system and extra lighting. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers alongside Steve, when a new resident approached us. He introduced himself as Tom and said he had just moved in 2 weeks ago. I heard there was some kind of drama with the HOA last year, Tom said casually. Something about a generator. Steve and I exchanged glances. I flipped a burger before responding. Yeah, there was an incident. The old HOA president made some bad decisions. It got sorted out. I heard she stole someone's generator, Tom pressed. She borrowed it without permission, I said diplomatically, and she faced the consequences, but that's all in the past now. We have a great board and the community is doing well. Tom seemed satisfied with that answer and moved on to get a drink. Steve chuckled. You're a lot more diplomatic than you used to be, he said. I learned that sometimes the victory isn't in proving you were right. It's in making sure the problem gets fixed so it doesn't happen to anyone else. Deep thoughts for a Tuesday evening, Steve said, grinning. Well, I had a lot of time to think while my security system was offline, I said dryly. We both laughed. The rest of the evening passed pleasantly. Kids played on the clubhouse lawn. Adults socialized and planned neighborhood projects. Margaret gave a brief speech thanking volunteers and outlining upcoming community improvements, all properly budgeted and approved by the board. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much had changed in a year. I had gone from being a relatively quiet homeowner who kept to himself to someone who had stood up to corruption and helped improve his community. It wasn't a role I had sought out or particularly wanted, but it was one I had handled as best I could. My generator sat in its enclosure in my side yard, properly secured with a new reinforced lock and a motion sensor alarm system that would alert me and the security company if anyone tampered with it. My security system ran flawlessly, recording everything, protecting my property and giving me peace of mind. I had learned several important lessons from the experience. First, HOA board members are not above the law, no matter what they might think. Second, standing up for yourself is important, even when it's uncomfortable. Third, documentation is everything. Without that trail camera footage, the case would have been much harder to prove. And finally, communities work best when leaders serve the people, not rule over them. The Desert Vista Estates community thrived under Margaret's leadership. Violations were issued fairly and only for legitimate concerns. Decisions were made transparently. Residents felt heard and respected. It was what an HOA should be: a tool for maintaining property values and community standards, not a weapon for petty tyrants to wield. In June, I received my final piece of correspondence related to the generator incident. It was a letter from Patricia Williamson's lawyer, informing me that she had completed her probation successfully and that all legal obligations had been fulfilled. The letter included a brief personal note from Patricia herself. "Mr. Kendrick, I realize my apology in court was insufficient. I want you to know that I have spent the past year reflecting on my actions and the harm I caused. I was wrong to take your property. I was wrong to abuse my position as HOA president. I was wrong to put my vision of how things should be above the rights of individual homeowners. I have learned from this experience, and I hope you can eventually forgive me. Sincerely, Patricia Williamson." I read the letter several times. It seemed more genuine than her court statement, though I had no way of knowing if she truly meant it or if it was one final attempt to salvage her conscience. Either way, I appreciated the effort. I filed the letter away with the rest of the documentation from the case and decided to consider the matter fully closed. Summer in Scottsdale was brutally hot, as always, but my home remained cool and secure. My security system weathered several monsoon storms without issue, the generator standing ready as backup, but never needed. I took on new clients, grew my consulting business, and enjoyed life in a community that finally felt like a community rather than a battleground. In August, during the anniversary of Margaret's election as president, the board held a special meeting to discuss long-term planning for Desert Vista Estates. They invited interested residents to participate. About 40 people showed up, including me. The discussion covered everything from landscaping improvements to traffic calming measures to plans for a community garden. Every suggestion was considered, debated respectfully, and put to a vote. It was democracy in action on a small scale, and it was exactly what HOA governance should look like. At one point, Margaret acknowledged the elephant in the room. "I think we all know that last year was difficult for our community. We had leadership that lost sight of what an HOA is supposed to do, but we came through it stronger. We established better policies. We learned to communicate better. And we proved that a community can recover from mistakes and become better for it." There was a round of applause. Several people glanced at me. I nodded acknowledgement but didn't seek attention. This wasn't about me being a hero. This was about a community learning from a bad experience and choosing to do better. As fall arrived and the weather became pleasant again, I found myself actually enjoying HOA events rather than avoiding them. The Halloween party at the Clubhouse was well organized and fun. The Thanksgiving food drive collected hundreds of donations for local families. The holiday lights contest was judged fairly, without nitpicking about exact placement or approved colors. In December, I ran into Margaret at the grocery store. We chatted about various community matters, and she mentioned that the HOA had received an award from the Arizona HOA Alliance for community improvement and transparency. "We're being recognized as an example of how HOA governance should work," she said proudly. "And honestly, Lucas, I think part of that is because of what happened last year. It forced us to examine our policies and make real changes." "I'm glad something good came out of it," I said. "More than something. A lot of good. But I am sorry you had to go through all that." "It worked out in the end. And hey, I got a really good security system out of it," she laughed. "That you did." As the year drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the entire experience during a quiet evening at home. My security system hummed along reliably in the background. My generator sat ready in case of emergency. My property was secure, my home was peaceful, and my community was well managed. The experience with Patricia Williamson had taught me that the law applies equally to everyone, regardless of their position or intentions. It taught me that documentation and evidence matter more than rhetoric and excuses. It taught me that standing up for yourself, even when others think you're being difficult, is sometimes necessary. Most importantly, it taught me that communities are made up of individuals, and those individuals have rights that no HOA board, no matter how well-intentioned, has the authority to violate. An HOA exists to serve its members, not to rule them. Property rights matter. Due process matters. Respect matters. Patricia Williamson had forgotten those lessons, or perhaps had never learned them in the first place. She had believed that her position gave her authority to do whatever she thought was necessary, consequences be damned. She had been wrong, and she had paid the price for that mistake. I hoped she had truly learned from the experience, as her letter suggested. I hoped she would never again abuse a position of authority, but whether she had or not wasn't my concern anymore. I had done what I needed to do, stood up for my rights, sought justice through proper channels, and helped ensure that what happened to me wouldn't happen to anyone else in my community. On New Year's Eve, the HOA hosted a party at the Clubhouse. I attended with Steve and several other neighbors. As midnight approached and we counted down together, I felt genuinely grateful for how things had turned out. My generator had been stolen, yes, but in the process, I had helped remove a corrupt board president, improved HOA governance, and made my community a better place to live. As the clock struck midnight and everyone cheered, I raised my glass along with my neighbors. Here's to a new year, I thought. Here's to communities that work. Here's to HOA boards that serve rather than rule. And here's to backup generators that stay right where they belong, powering the homes they were meant to protect. The party continued well into the early morning hours, powered by the Clubhouse's properly installed, legitimately owned generator. My own generator sat secure in my yard, protecting my security system and my peace of mind. Everything was exactly as it should be.